Here we are again. Hi, everybody. My name is Lynn Bolger. I am the Executive Director of the Authors Guild Foundation. I would like to take this opportunity, this is a new thing for me, but to remind you that if there's an emergency, there are exits on both sides of the theater marked by the red exit signs. Okay, how'd I do? All right. This is our second WIT Festival, and I'd love a show of hands of people who did not come last year. Welcome, great. So, a mixed bag. Some return customers and some new people. Welcome, everyone. The theme of our festival this year is changing the narrative, and I'm going to share the welcome in your program because we're filming all of these to share with people who are at home. And so we want the people watching to get a sense of what we're trying to achieve here. As everyone in the live audience knows, the festival is free and open to the public. Thanks to our Giving Society and our sponsors and partners who we love from the bottom of our heart. We want everybody, students and their parents and old, young, everybody from any economic striation to be able to come and hear the conversations and the panelists, the cutting edge thinking that we're offering here today and throughout the weekend in 9 highly curated conversations, panels, and interviews. Each year we choose a theme, and this year we're exploring how we are shaped by narratives as a society at large, and how we individually are impacted by stories that we've heard from birth, we learned in school, seen in ads, and read in our news feeds. We're going to examine some common misconceptions that are just wrong, maybe fraudulent, and how we know information is true or false. We'll hear from 23 amazing writers, poets, novelists, journalists, biographers, essayists, memoirists, scholars, and a few special guests on how words change the way we see and experience and understand our lives. We'll hear about stories we tell ourselves, how memory fails us and saves us, how time travel actually does work, how reality is going to get a lot more elusive, and how the past is never dead. It's not even past, as our friend said, and how fake news helped foment the American Revolution, and how false narratives, now supercharged by social media, are undermining our democracy. We created this festival as a celebration of writers and their work and their place in our society as intellectuals and creators of America's literary culture. Thank you for being with us as we celebrate new voices, literary lions, diverse perspectives, and the power of the written word. I want to welcome our board member, Hunter Runette, to introduce session 1 of the 2023 WIT Festival. Thank you for being here.
Welcome, everybody, to this first session of our second annual Words, Ideas, Thinkers Festival. My name is Hunter Runette, and I sit on the board of the Authors Guild Foundation Board. Before I remind you for a second time to silence your phones, I want to thank each and every one of you for all of your support, your connections, but mostly for your curiosity towards these sessions this weekend. In particular, I'd like to really thank the epic sponsor, Cromwell Harbor Foundation. As both our guests tonight might add with me, it feels good to exercise our freedom, so enjoy this weekend. It is a privilege to introduce the authors here this afternoon who will be speaking on politics and prose. They are, in my opinion, heroic educators because they have spent much of their lives being so generous with their insight and wisdom. So without further ado, our first guest is Jennie Kassanoff, who is the Adolph S. and Effie Oakes Professor of American Studies History at Barnard College, Columbia University, where she is Professor of English. She is the author of Edith Wharton and the Politics of Race, and is completing a new book entitled Voter Rights, A Literary History of the Voting Rights Acts. Her essays have appeared in PMLA, American Literature, Henry James Review, and American Literary History. She is the recipient of both of Barnard's top teaching prizes and co-founder of Barnard's Consortium for Critical Interdisciplinary Studies. Within our Berkshire Hills, she has been an incredible force of community engagement on the Jacob's Pillow dance board. Please welcome Jennie. Jane Smiley is the author of a banquet of novels, including 1,000 Acres, which was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and the Last 100 Years trilogy, Sumlock, Early Warning, and Golden Age. She recently wrote A Dangerous Business, a Poe-inspired historical Western mystery set in Monterey, California, 1851. Wow. She is the author of books for young adults, as well as several works of nonfiction, including her most recent collection of essays, The Questions That Matter Most. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, she's also received the Penn Center U.S. Lifetime Achievement Award for Literature. She currently lives in Northern California, and we welcome her here with delight to the Berkshires. Please silence your phones. Please silence your phones.
Wow, here we are.
Here we are. Beautiful spot.
Well, I want to add my thanks to Lynn and Hunter and everyone, all of you, for spending an hour or so with us, and especially you, Jane Smiley. I'm a longtime reader, first-time caller. It's really an honor to share the stage with someone I've so admired and who has engaged and been beloved of so many readers. You have rightly been called the Balzac of the late 20th century Midwest, and it's hard to beat that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, today's kickoff event is of the Mighty Wit Festival is called Politics and Prose. And I think that's apt because so many of the subjects that you've written about anticipate the issues that are vexing us in the present day. And so I thought we'd just dive right in by talking a little bit about the period of national division we're in right now. And in particular, something that you anticipated in writing a book like The All True Travels and Adventures of Liddy Newton, which you published in 1998, and in which you describe pre-Civil War Kansas Territory, KT, as it's called in the novel, and the tensions between the Kansas Free Soilers and Missouri pro-slavery Missourians. I'm interested in your thoughts about how those divisions resonate today, and if anything has changed since the time of Liddy Newton.
Well, you know, I've thought about that a lot. And when the reason I started writing Liddy, I had finished 1,000 Acres, and I'd finished The Greenlanders, which was the book that I was most dedicated to for the first 10 or 15 years of my career. And I was in Washington, D.C. with my daughter, who's actually here, at the time of, I believe it was the Oklahoma bombing. And I called her dad to tell him that everything seemed fine in Washington. And I said, and he was a specialist in American history. And I said, I feel like I should write about something that addresses this subject. And the first word out of his mouth was Kansas. Now, if you grow up in St. Louis, you do not pay one bit of attention to Kansas. You're always looking toward the East Coast, except if the Cards are playing, the Kansas City team. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I went and started researching the 1850s problems in Kansas Territory. And I thought they were totally fascinating. And one of the reasons was that the abolitionists were determined. Well, one of the reasons was that the Congress had made a mistake in wanting to allow slavery north of the Mason-Dixon line. And so the abolitionists from Boston and Massachusetts headed out to Kansas to prevent this, and the pro-slave people from mostly Missouri headed over there to make sure. And so it was an unnecessary fight, but everybody who was involved in it took it as the opportunity to be as violent as possible. So the premise of the story is that Liddy is basically a plain girl, a tall, plain girl from Quincy, Illinois. And a man is on his way through town who's from Boston. He is an abolitionist. And her family sort of contrives this plan to marry her off to this guy. Her ideas about slavery are foggy, not because she's for it, but because she doesn't think about it very much. And so she marries this guy who's a lovely, great guy, and they move out to Kansas, and she's totally amazed and also horrified by the conflicts that are taking place there. And I was right with her in that area when I was writing the book. I didn't know too much about it, and the more I learned about it, the more shocking I thought it was. And so I can't say that I enjoyed writing it, but I found writing it to be totally fascinating. And I guess what I thought at the time was, once we know something about this, then maybe we can figure out how to fix it. Around the same time, or slightly later, I wrote 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel. And it was basically a history of the novel as an art form, starting basically in the 18th century. But one of the things that fascinated me, the more I read it, the more I read the books. I read about 130 books, 130 novels, starting with the tale of Genji, and then moving up to the beginning of the 21st century. And
you said this was because you had writer's block.
Well, sort of. It wasn't that I had writer's block. It was that I just when the 9/11 took place, a lot of writers just looked at what they were writing and said, "Boy, this is pointless." And so I decided to read all these books, and I discovered that there were all these novelists who had lived in times of fear and war and horror, and they'd gotten through it by writing about it. Some of them, like Jane Austen, had gotten through it by writing about things that had nothing to do with that stuff. But one of the things that struck me as I was reading all the books was the way in which the invention of the novel as a form draws readers in through the story and then shows them things that maybe they didn't know about the way other people live, about the way other people think, about the things that they have to go through and suffer through. And those things can be political or they can be personal. And it fascinated me to read all of those novels and to understand the way that writing novels and also reading novels the way you do when you start out as a kid, it opens the world to you. It opens the inner lives of other people. You know, it's not that I could say that I imagined life in the time of Pride and Prejudice the way it really happened when I was reading it when I was 13. But when I was imagining it, it still opened it up to me. It made me curious about things that were going on. It made me curious about Jane Austen herself. It made me curious about the world that she lived in. And so I guess one of the things I learned from writing 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel was that because it's a lengthy prose narrative about the way people feel, the way people think, the way people imagine their own lives, it gives you insight into other people and also into yourself. And that's when I was reading those books when I was growing up, I thought, oh, yeah, I want to do this. You know, I started out with the Bobbsey twins. Love the Bobbsey twins.
Bobbsey twins.
And I contemplated over and over and over why in one book Freddie and Flossie were 6 and Nan and Bert were 8, and in another book Freddie and Flossie were 6 and Nan and Bert were 12. I could never figure that out. But then I went on to Nancy Drew and the Dana boys, and then I went to high school and junior high, and we read a lot of books there, and I just couldn't stop. I adored it. And so when I got to my senior year in college, I thought, well, why not? They did it, I'll do it.
Would that it were so easy. Well, it is interesting because in some ways the novel is such a private form. You know, it requires a quiet place to, unlike theater, let's say. It's something that you do by yourself. Reading and writing is something that you do by yourself, and it's something that somehow sort of disarmingly private. So that So it sounds like it's sort of, that's part of the way that we learn about difference and about other worlds, is because we're kind of open to that.
Yes, and we can have our own opinions. We don't have to sit around the dinner table with the other members of the family and discuss our opinions and have arguments. We can make up our own minds and have our own opinions. And I think when you are, say, 11, 12, 13, that's an important time to realize that you can have your own opinion and that you can read books and learn more. I was lucky to go to a school where we had to read a different book every 2 weeks. Sometimes they were hard, sometimes I didn't understand them, sometimes I adored them. But I'm really grateful that I was introduced to all of those books. And you just have this sense that your inner life is opening up.
Do you think that pleasure is a key piece of reading and of the things that when you're writing, are you thinking about pleasure as part of the equation?
I take a lot of pleasure in writing, even if the story is depressing or I don't know, dark in some way. It's still a puzzle. You still have to make your way through the plot. You have to understand the characters. You have to imagine the setting. You have to understand what your theme is and how you're going to present that to the reader so that the reader also will understand it. And so it becomes a puzzle that you can't stop trying to sort out. Remember when I was writing 1,000 Acres, the puzzle was, okay, here's King Lear, it's set on a farm, it's in Iowa. It's not a king, but he is a very wealthy landowner. The plan was to follow King Lear, the play, as closely as I possibly could. And then at one point, I guess it was somewhere about 2/3 of the way in, I realized I'd diverged from the plot. I did give myself permission not to kill everybody off. Because I wanted Jennie, who was based on Goneril, to be able to reflect about what happened. But even though I found the story very depressing, I also just couldn't help wanting to fix it and make it work. Now, the reason I started out writing 1,000 Acres was that in school we'd had to read King Lear, like, 4 or 5 times over the course of the, and the thing that really annoyed me, especially when I saw the play, was that Lear would never shut up. And I don't know why it annoyed me that he wouldn't shut up when it didn't annoy me that Hamlet wouldn't shut up either, but...
Kings, am I right?
Yeah, I guess. It did, but I liked listening to Hamlet. Maybe it's because he was a kid, But I didn't. But anyway, I wanted to know what Goneril and Regan were thinking. So that's why I wrote 1,000 Acres, to give voice to Goneril as Jennie and Regan as Rose. And it just was a puzzle, and and every puzzle in every book is different. So when I was writing the Greenlanders, the puzzle was how to use a style, a writing style, that is similar enough to the way that the Greenlanders themselves would have thought, but how to make it so that the modern reader could actually understand it. And one of the things that made me choose the style I did was that when I was studying Old Icelandic, people didn't say...
As one does.
Well, if you love the sagas, yeah, you do.
Okay.
But characters in the sagas don't say, I was thinking the other night, blah, blah, blah. Or they say, the grammar of the Icelandic term is actually, it thought me. So I noticed that in the sagas, the things that you thought seemed to come to you from outside rather than within. And I thought I could not realistically portray the Greenlanders and give them this deep internal life, because actually your deep internal life comes from reading novels. So anyway, each book was a different kind of puzzle. And that's the thing that kept me going with each one.
I like this image of a puzzle, and one question I wanted to ask you about going back to 1,000 Acres, which I have lots of questions about, since I have taught it in a course called Shakespeare and the American Imagination. I wondered about that there's a central game in the novel, Monopoly. And that many authors have their particular games, right? So T.S. Eliot has chess, right? And in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, it's checkers. But for you are the novelist of Monopoly. And I'm just wondering, first of all, do you like playing Monopoly? What games do you like to play, Jane Smiley?
Well, actually, I don't play Monopoly anymore. I mean, we grew up playing Monopoly when I was a kid, and I enjoyed it then. But now, we play this weird game. The only game that we play anymore is this weird game that we play with a couple of friends of ours, and it's called Mexican Train. Yeah,
there's some Mexican Train fans in the audience.
That's a fun game. But I also love to play games and puzzles in the New York Times and the Spelling Bee and all that stuff.
Those are good games.
Yeah.
But going back to Monopoly, I mean, even if you don't like it, it is or like to play it anymore. I have a very very progressive lefty daughter who has a penchant for games that are about imperialism and world conquest. It's kind of one of the ironies of,
Well,
and she's
that's-
really good at them too, by
I
the
would
way.
have to say that that's probably why I like Monopoly, that it was a demonstration of the world that we lived in.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of capitalism on steroids.
Yeah.
So in terms of 1,000 acres, I mean, you have said that it was that it was more political. It was more explicitly political than the works that you'd written before that. And that it was not only political in the sense that you were engaging Shakespeare and also issues of sexual abuse, but it was also political in terms of engaging farming as a business. And I wondered if you could say more about that. And behind that is a question of, like, do you think of yourself as a political writer?
Well, I think every novelist is a political writer. You cannot write a long piece of prose without having a theory about how things work, what's good, what's bad, how they should work. And I learned that from Charles Dickens, because he had a lot of theories about what was going on in England when he was walking around. One of the things I love about him was that he was an insomniac, and he would spend a lot of time walking around London, and he was a great eavesdropper. That's another good thing for a novelist to be. And so he picked up what people were talking about, but also how they were talking, and how that showed their various places in the world of London society. And we started reading Dickens when I was in 7th grade at my school, and I kept on reading Dickens. And so I would have to say he showed me what a novelist could do in a way that, say, Jane Austen, who I also loved, didn't show me. He showed me that you could tell a dramatic and interesting story and also look at the world around you and also have a theory about how things should or could improve. And I believe that. When I started writing 1,000 Acres, and the inspiration being the Oklahoma bombing, it did make me say, okay, where does all the hatred and violence in American history come from? Why does it keep on keeping on? And I can never remember the names of all the books I read, but there is a wonderful book, and maybe the name will come back to me, that I read about how various parts of the U.S. were colonized by groups of people from different parts of the UK. And they brought their culture with them. So that, let's say, the Cavaliers who colonized Virginia, they brought a culture of dominance with them, which they promptly turned into a culture of pro-slavery dominance. The Puritans, I think they were from Norfolk, I can't remember exactly, but they brought their ideas with them to Boston and to Massachusetts. And so here's a group that in England sometimes would be in connection with one another, but in America, this group lives in Massachusetts, this group lives in Virginia. And another group came through that came from the central north area, the upper Midlands area. And they brought a whole other way of looking at things with them. And so in some sense, because all of these different places were colonized by these different people, the different groups of people, these people retained their beliefs when they brought them. And as they became more and more in contact with one another, they became more and more antagonistic toward the people who they disagreed with. So, yeah, we can blame the Brits for a lot of stuff. And
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that you're right. There's a lot in the history of the United States and the colonial period as well that sort of is still with us. It's sort of part of the DNA, and yet one hopes that there is a way to think your way out of that, that it's not almost a sort of, even using the term DNA implies a kind of biological determinism, right? That it's sort of, this is the history of this country, and it's built into the way that we, these kind of old, as in the Greenlanders, these old enmities. And I'm just wondering where you think, how do we get out of those stories?
Well, excuse me, sorry about that. I guess that I was hoping, as the internet made us more connected with one another, I was hoping that we would learn to be friends. But that doesn't seem to be true, because there seems to be people who are determined to plant the seeds of controversy and the seeds of hatred just for fun. And I think that all of us, but at my age, I'll be 74 in exactly 6 days.
Ooh, happy birthday.
I think that a lot of people who are my age thought things were going to improve. They knew there would be waves, or we knew there would be waves, but we didn't perceive how new inventions like the internet were going to make those waves more horrifying. And I don't know. I go back and forth. I mean, when I was, we talked about this earlier when I was in college. The only disagreement I had with my boyfriend was that he was a Marxist and I was a writer. and he felt that all American problems worst American problems were class-based, and I felt that they were race-based. And we didn't argue about it, we just disagreed about it. But we thought they were going to be fixed, And I thought they were going to be fixed even if we didn't become a communist country. And so, is that just in our DNA? Don't tell me what to do. Is that part of our DNA? I don't know.
One of the things that, and here I'm going to exercise my privilege as a 19th century Americanist to talk about Huckleberry Finn for a second, so sorry, but I get to do this. You wrote an essay, a really interesting iconoclastic essay for Harper's in 1997, where you took Mark Twain to task for...
But he's a Missouri boy. You got to take him to task.
Well, there you go. And in it, you said that that Huckleberry Finn was at best an uneven novel, and at worst a kind of act of bad faith. And particularly you went after the way that Jim is treated in the narrative, which you're in good company. Many people have been struck by. The way that the novel kind of abandons Jim at the end of the narrative, but you said that he's just treated as Huck's sidekick, and that the novel kind of suffers from a certain kind of sentimentalism, and that's the piece I want to pick up on, because what you ended up saying was that that one of the reasons that people love Huckleberry Finn, or that they give Huck a pass, is because he loves Jim, and because he sees Jim as a friend, and he respects Jim as a man, and that
but it doesn't mind putting him in danger.
That's right. And you went on to say, exactly, you went on to say that it is not enough, you said, to just love somebody. You said that Huck doesn't actually have to act in accordance with his feelings. And then you went on, white Americans always think racism is a feeling, and they reject it or they embrace it. They almost inevitably fail to understand that how they feel means very little to Black Americans, who understand racism as a way of structuring American culture, American politics, and the American economy. And I think this is such an important point about the role that sentimentalism, white sentimentalism, the idea of feeling over thinking, plays in terms of white supremacy. And I wondered if you want to expand on that.
The reason that I discussed Huck in that essay was that, and I had decided, because I'd fallen off a horse and broken my ankle, and I didn't have anything else to do, I decided to reread Huck Finn, which we'd read in high school, or I don't know, some school. And I'm sure it was like 9th grade or something. And then also to read Harriet Beecher Stowe's
Uncle Tom's
Cabin, which we had never read. And I thought, well, I'm going to read them both. And I was incredibly struck by Uncle Tom's Cabin, because she got much more deeply into the minds of all of her characters. And some characters that were in that book had never even been mentioned when you heard about the book, and one of them was this African-American slave woman who basically escapes across the Ohio River on foot carrying her baby. And another one was, and we'd grown up hearing that an Uncle Tom was a bad person, but the character of Tom in the book is incredibly complicated. He's very spiritual. He puts up with what he has to put up with because he truly, truly believes that he's going to receive his reward in heaven. He truly believes that. And so Stowe's portrait of her characters, both the white ones and the African American ones, was much more detailed and complicated. It was like this interesting net of all different types of people who have to put up with the same situation. And I was really struck by that, and I could see why it had been a famous book. But I couldn't believe that everybody said Huck Finn was the great American novel, when it was so much simpler and less moving than Uncle Tom's Cabin. And that was a hugely controversial article.
Yeah.
And that was before the era of comments, in the article. But they got more letters to the editor than they'd ever gotten before. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, wait a minute, I'm right, you're wrong.
That's so interesting. Another kind of piece of that is, James Baldwin famously didn't like Uncle Tom's Cabin, but he didn't like Uncle Tom's Cabin for the same reason that you don't like Huckleberry Finn. That he essentially says it's sentimentalism, and it rewards Stowe's feeling of being sort of superior herself, having written this book. So it's really interesting that
well, maybe he didn't notice Cassie escaping across the Ohio River, which was like one of the most amazingly brave things a character has ever done in American literature.
Jane Smiley's taking on James Baldwin here.
Oh, well, where is he?
In regards to all the ways that I mentioned at the beginning that you've sort of anticipated these kind of issues that we're still wrestling with today, and you've kind of taught us in some ways to how to begin to read those issues. So one of the ways that you've taught us to think about is the world of contagion and illness. Like, there are contagions in a lot of your writing. Here I'm thinking about everything from the plague in the Greenlanders, which sort of is haunting the whole novel.
Yeah, but it never gets there.
No, that's true.
That's
because everybody was wearing masks in Greenland.
no, it's
and they were
because
immunized, right?
No, it's because the ships couldn't make it.
Okay.
Everybody on the ships from Europe would die before they got to Greenland, so they didn't make it.
Okay, details, Jane. But here I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking also about your beautiful early short story / novella, The Age of Anxiety, where...
The Age of Grief.
The Age of Grief, sorry. That's my own anxiety coming out here. The Age of Grief, sorry, that in which the flu plays a big role. And so I guess what I'm asking is, what kind of narratives do you think these big epidemiological health events create? And have you thought about what the way that COVID-19 might work into your narratives?
Well, actually, I was just working on a book that has COVID in it, and I'm not sure it'll ever get published, but it's called The Trail, and it was an experiment. I've written the rough draft. I haven't finished it, but the experiment was I was walking on a trail near us called the River Trail. And there was a man, I looked at a man behind me who looked a little, I don't know, threatening, but he wasn't acting threatening. There was just something about the way he was built that was threatening. And he didn't do anything. But when I got home, I imagined somebody walking, a woman walking. And she falls down. She gets smacked in the back and falls down. And at first she thinks it's a mountain lion because there's a lot of signs on our trails in California about beware of the mountain lion. But then she turns around and it's this tall, bulky guy, and he has a gun in his hand. And so my plan was that I would not plan. I would just go day by day. I would write exactly, I think it was 1,000 words a day, and see where the story took me. And I decided I wasn't going to set it around us, so I'd set it up in Atherton, And so that set up the people around her and him as well-to-do. And I was just going to follow it and see where it went. And because because my little event on the river trail had taken place during COVID, it had to be during COVID. So I incorporated that.
Mm. And is the COVID piece of it I remember people talking about don't run close to other people because when you're jogging, you're breathing out, and people are being aggressive joggers.
Person. She's a very cautious person, so she's very cautious around other people all during COVID.
Hmm. Well, what you said about writing 1,000 words a day is, I think a lot of us in this room, you're so incredibly prolific, and you do more in a day than most of us do over several years. And I just wanted if you could talk a little bit about your writing process. Like, what's a day in the life for you?
Well, it starts with this, which I take to the hot tub. That's where I start my day.
Ew.
And I get up about 6, and I go to the hot tub and take the Diet Coke with me. Come back in, do some reading, and then, maybe around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I get back to work. And I work for about 2 hours on whatever it is that I'm writing, and either making it up or fixing it up, one or the other. Mm. And then I have some kind of lunch, and then I go for another walk that afternoon, and then I love to cook and I love to make dinner, so then I plan what's for dinner, and so that's sort of what it is.
Wait, so it's just those 2 hours?
Mm-hmm.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, and maybe I'll blame my family for this. You know, I came from a talkative family, so open your mouth or open your computer and blah, 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 out it comes. I don't like to write more than about. Sometimes I write up to say 1,500 words a day, but I don't like to write more than that because I like it to sit overnight, and then I like to go back the next morning and read through it and be stimulated by what I wrote. If one of my favorite things is that if I get stuck, I'll just look around and I'll throw some little thing in. And one of the things I found in that is that that little thing, that little detail that you threw in is either a seed or a pebble. It's either a placeholder, in which case it's a pebble, and it's just an indication of something that's going on there, or it's the beginning of a new idea, and in that case, it pushes you. You get the energy from that thing. But that's the greatest thing about writing a novel, as far as I'm concerned, is you just keep learning from what you're doing. You go on and on and on and on. And then you read it. You read through it, and your reading brain is more, intelligent than your writing brain, because you've read a lot of books. You've read all that stuff, and so your reading brain, as you're reading what you wrote, says, that's not working, I gotta fix that. Or, oh, I like that, I didn't realize that's pretty interesting. Oh, yeah. So your reading brain, and this is why you have to write down a certain number of words and then get away from it, so that you can come back to it. I knew a woman who wrote a book about creativity, and one of the things she said was that when you put stuff on the page and then go away from it, your brain does this thing that sort of pares down what it is. And so you aren't having all these confusing thoughts. All those go away. And your reading brain the next day says, oh yeah, okay, that works, this doesn't work, that doesn't work.
Or in my case, who wrote this garbage?
But you also can't be self-critical. You have to accept that the story has to take on a life of its own, and you're just going to go along with it. I mean, that's what happened with the last 100 Years trilogy. I think after about the first 200 pages of and in the end it was about 1,200 pages long for all 3 volumes. It was more like I was sitting on a train just typing down what people around me were saying, because the characters had taken on their own life, and I had to keep up with them and follow them. I didn't feel like I was making up their lives. I felt like they were telling me their lives. And that's a wonderful feeling. It was similar to that when I was writing The Greenlanders, and I think that was because of the style. The first 50 pages were incredibly difficult, and I did not know what in the world I was doing because of the subject, because of the style. And I did actually go to Greenland in 1985 just to see what it was like there. But after the first 50 pages, zip, it was like being transported out of my own body. And when I was finishing it up, I was up in the Catskills because we had a house up there for a while. And I would sit down at my computer and start writing. And I would think I'd been writing for about an hour and a half, and it turned out I'd been writing for 5 hours because I couldn't stop. And then when that one went to the publisher, once my editor got used to the style too, it was the same with her. She had hardly any criticisms, hardly any suggestions. It was like it had just been communicated to me through that, from the atmosphere or something. It was really, really, really weird, and I don't want to have that happen to me.
Well, I mean, you do have a way of being able to kind of have these magical channeling experiences. I mean, you often give voice to the voiceless. For example, at the beginning of Some Luck, the first narrator is an 11-month-old baby, right? And then ultimately, you know, from your work, we hear the voices of racehorses, we hear very chatty Parisian crows, a fat pig that's as big as a Volkswagen Beetle, and his name is Earl Butts.
Oh, poor Earl.
Oh, Earl. But I'm actually interested in what makes you do that. So, you know, usually we associate talking animals or talking babies with, you know, children's fiction, but you make a really convincing case for its aptness in, you know, adult fiction. And why do you want to give voice to human animals and non-human animals alike?
Well, I've always loved dogs and horses, and I've always had the sense with dogs and horses that they had their own opinions, you know, and that made me really curious. And we've always had plenty of dogs, and I've always had plenty of horses, and so the more insight you can have into the mind of your horse, then the less likely it is that he's going to toss you. So it's really sort of an important safety issue, is trying to understand what the horse is doing. When I grew up riding horses, you know, if the horse didn't do what you want, well, smack him or kick him with the spurs. No, no, no. When I started having horses as an adult, but also breeding my own, I saw that even the ones I bred who were related to one another were quite different in their approach to life. And some were agreeable, and some were anxious, and some had a temper, you know. And that's one of the things I wanted to explore in the horse books, was that they aren't just these useful animals. They have their own view of things. And when I wrote Perestroika in Paris, that was because my horse, Perestroika, had so many idiosyncratic ways of doing things or appearing to be thinking about things, and I wanted to explore that. She was and is a very interesting animal.
So there's sort of debates in animal studies world about anthropomorphizing. Nope, no, bad. Okay, please.
No, it's not. You're not anthropomorphizing them. You're analyzing them. You know, people who spend their lives around animals know that they differ from one another. They want some things more than they want other things. That even if, and for me, maybe it was because all the horses that I bred were related to one another, I could see the similarities and the differences. And I wanted to empathize. I'm not anthropomorphizing, I'm empathizing. I'm trying to see things through their point of view. And you have to know. I mean, one time I was riding Paris in this arena at the place we had her at that time. And we were just wandering around. She was fine, and she paused, and she looked to the left. And so I looked to the left to see what she was looking at. And there was a mountain lion staring at us. And it was like she just said, huh, and kept on walking. She wasn't even afraid. I thought that was really interesting. And there were other things that she would be afraid of. For example, if she heard, we had a lot of wild turkeys around, and if she heard the wild turkeys making noises, she would get sort of freaked out. So, why are you afraid of turkeys and not mountain lions, girl?
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever figured out why, but I did figure out that she did have different things that annoyed her or made her frightened. And all horses are different. The horse that I am now riding, who I did not breed, I was on him maybe about 2 years ago, and I decided to try an experiment, which was to sit on him as still as I possibly could and just turn my head to see what he did. And if I turned my head, he turned his head. If I turned it this way, he turned it that way. It was like, and I do believe he's like the smartest horse I've ever seen. He's incredibly observant, and he pays a lot of attention to me, whether I'm on him or not on him. And I just think, and he's learned all kinds of voice commands, like, Frankie, go right, zoop, he's off to the right. Frankie, go left, zoop, he's off to the left. And I just think it's fascinating that he would be this kind of observant, intelligent guy. So they're all different, and that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So
We haven't talked enough about politics.
Oh, no, well,
you're doing a great job. It's a great job. But before we go to Q&A, let's give Jennie and Jane a round of applause. And I am going to pick people from the audience who have their hands up, and you can direct but I can't see people, so maybe lights up a nudge, a niche, and maybe these ones don't.
Right in the middle.
Can anybody see
There's
any
somebody
hands?
right in the middle.
Okay, yes.
In the third row.
Stand up if they want. Standing up is a good idea.
Oh, great.
Mentioned the waves of the internet. Can you comment?
And I'm going to repeat, or Jane's going to repeat, Jennie's going to repeat the question so that we get it on recording. So yes, ma'am?
Given what you said earlier about novelists and politics and how events like the Oklahoma City bombing and the Kansas territory have inspired good writing and great literature, given the state of our country, the divisiveness and our current politics, can we, in a hopeful state, expect that there's going to be some great literature coming down the pipe?
Okay, the question is, given our current politics, can we expect, in a hopeful state, can we expect great literature in the future? We have no way of knowing. I believe it's all up to AI. The most important thing is for there to be readers. And so it's really important to do what my teachers did when I was in school, which was to get me to read books and to get me to do it regularly and to give me both fun books and also challenging books. And if you don't have the school system that produces the readers, then you won't have the writers either. The readers have to, especially of novels, they have to want to be immersed in that story, whatever that story is, even if they don't quite understand that story. And they aren't going to be able to do that unless the teachers pull them along. Now, there are plenty of people who grow up in literary families who learn to read at home, and they talk about books at home. But I think it also has to become a job that you do for school. And then the more you do it for school, then the more you go to the library. One of my favorite things when I was growing up was to be taken to the St. Louis County Library, which was about, 4 or 5 blocks from our house. And my mom would just drop me off, and I would go read the books, and I would lie down by the shelves and just read. I couldn't stop. And I think that's important. But the novel pulls you in as a reader because there's suspense, because there's something might happen, and because you like the characters in the way that they're sort of friends that you want to get to know more.
Also, thanks for the PSA for English teachers.
Yeah.
Or French teachers.
And French teachers, exactly.
And the man who started to ask his question,
Yes,
when
you mentioned the waves of the internet. Can you comment on the waves of ChatGPT, your hopes and desires for the future?
Can I comment on ChatGPT, my hopes and desires for the future? No, I cannot comment on that. I don't know what that's going to be like. The thing about education is successful when it makes the child or the student curious. And the more that this child wants to know, then the more he or she will go ahead and try and find out about it. I mean, for me, I guess one of the main ones that we had was my medieval history class in 9th grade. And I had a wonderful teacher. He was the most popular teacher in the school, and he made me want to know more about things that had happened, 600, 700, 5 years ago. And it gave me a fascination that eventually led to me reading the Icelandic sagas, to taking Old Norse, to becoming interested in the history of the English language. And that's what you want in your students, in all your students, even if you're a math teacher, God forbid. You want them to be fascinated and curious. And so if we don't have an educational system that can do that to our kids, then that's the nature of the future. It won't work. And so those are the issues that we have to solve, I would say.
we'll be talking a lot about that issue tomorrow at 1 on the AI and crypto. Second, yes, please.
Can both of you comment relative to now there is so much pressure and push to ban books that we had as required reading in high school or whenever, wherever, are now being banished?
This is a question about banned books. I wrote an essay about that in the spring or the winter when that was the big issue. I think it was for the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the thing that banned, it's a two-way street with banned books. If you ban books from children, the children are going to go right out and get one. And so it makes them want to see what it is that you won't let them see. On the other hand, I think that a lot of the books that are being banned are books that are political in nature and that teach children things that their parents or the other people, the grown-ups in their culture, don't want them to know. And that's a big issue in American culture. Do you want your children to know that a lot of American history is racist? Well, I want my children to know that because I want them to do their best to get rid of it when they are grown up. But other people don't want their children to know that. And I don't know how to solve that problem. The only way a writer can solve that problem is to just keep writing. Remember when I wrote 10 Days in the Hills, which is based in Hollywood and has tons and tons of sex in it. When it wasn't banned, I was so annoyed. I thought, wait, where's my $1 million here? If it's not banned, then it'll just go on being a regular old book. So,
Jane,
you know,
this is one of the questions I was going to ask you, which is like, how do you write about sex so well? But please keep going.
We have time for one
I've had
more
4
question.
different. I've had 4 different lovely husbands.
Okay.
That's what I learned from. Yeah.
Is there one more question out there? Oh, thank you. The person that this lovely woman is pointing to.
I was thinking of being curious about things. I'm interested in the role of research in your work, how much time you devote to that, and whether you go down rabbit holes with that, and how you balance that with your writing.
She's curious about how I use research. I use research all the time. The first book that I had to really research a lot was The Greenlanders. So I read all the Icelandic sagas to get in the mood. I went to Greenland to look around. I went to the Greenland Museum in Copenhagen, which was totally fascinating. One of the best things about it was that the women's dresses in the Copenhagen Museum that had been taken from Greenland had been frozen in the permafrost. And so you could get down on your hands and knees and look up at the hems, and you could see the stitches that the women had made, or probably women had made, when they were making the dresses. And it really took me back. I love research. I love finding out things. I love especially going to the places where the book is set and walking around and understanding how the landscape that I imagined is not quite right. And so I have to reimagine the landscape in order to make the book work. Now, one of the great problems in fiction that movies got rid of is that the author has to depict the landscape so that the reader can envision it and see what's happening, and where it's happening and what it feels like to be in that landscape. And so for me, it's really important to go to the place and walk around and sense what it's like to be there. I could see when I wrote 1,000 Acres in Iowa, but I could see that there was a difference. So I was coming home from Minneapolis, coming down the I-35, and got into the northern part of Iowa, and I looked around, and I said to my husband, oh, this is where I should set that Lear book. And then I did research into the different can you believe this? The different landscapes of Iowa? Oh my God. Well, that turned out to be a really interesting spot because the north central part of Iowa had been originally very marshy. And the settlers who came and settled it were from Norfolk, England. And the thing that they did was dig drainage wells to get rid of the water. Now, the thing they got from that was 12 feet of topsoil. The thing they lost was their health, because once pesticides came into farming, then the pesticides would go down the drainage wells. They'd get into the groundwater, and the local people would take them, eat them. in quantities greater than if they just were eating the corn or whatever it was. So all those things were fascinating to me. It was fascinating to me that I could be, 50 miles north of Ames where I lived, and the landscape was completely different. It was fascinating to me that the drainage wells happened. It was fascinating to me that my characters were going to have to deal with the pesticides. So I really love research. Research gives me a lot of good ideas. Now, these days you can do a lot of research on the internet. You can look up things that you don't have to go to the library and read the Encyclopedia Britannica over and over and over again. So that's one of the good things about the internet is we have access to more information.
Well, I just want to add something that Jane Smiley herself is the object of a great deal of research. I just did a little wander through the dissertations abstracts, which is really, and I just want to read some of the titles of dissertations, doctoral dissertations that have been written about Jane. Deconstructing Exploitative Systems and Restoring a Balanced Biosphere, an eco-feminist, post-humanist reading of Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, San Jose State. People as Garbage, Storytelling as Composting, in 6 novels, University of Minnesota. The University Military Industrial Complex and Contemporary American Culture and Democracy, Purdue.
People as composting?
Yeah, you're in it.
I gotta read that one. I love compost. I'm a real believer in compost.
Post note. And another thank you and round of applause. And right here tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning, we will have Margaret Verbal, whose first novel, Maud's Line, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Oscar Hokea, whose first novel won the Penn Faulkner Hemingway Prize. Tomorrow morning, 10:30. Jane and Jennie will be signing books in the lobby. The books that the bookstore in Lenox, the display there, they're all signed. If you want a personal message, you go to the table. So signed books, all done for you, right there at their kiosk. But if you would like a personal message, they'll be sitting at the table out front. So thank you for coming.